Nobody clears you through the Bravo but me.
Then clear me through.
No.
Yes.
Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. For our main topic today, we'll talk about a Las Vegas Class B violation that got a lot of attention on social media because the pilot ignored ATC instructions to exit the Bravo and instead whined that he wasn't to blame. Well, I'm going to relate this to the FAA's 5 hazardous attitudes, plus a 6th attitude that's been proposed by some researchers. Now, last week in episode 153, we talked with airshow pilot and Red Bull air racer Michael Goulian. And if you didn't hear that, you may want to check it out because it was a great interview. And if you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe button in whatever app you're listening to us now. That helps other people find the show, and it's the only way to get every new episode to automatically download to your phone as soon as it's released. And of course, it's free. And speaking of free, this episode is free, but I would love it if you join the 3 to 4% of people who listen to the show and support the show by donating via Patreon or PayPal each month via credit card. At any time, just go to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome or aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And if you value the show, well, just please show us some support. This week in the news, the FAA extends medical training and testing requirements again. And Diamond announces a new plane that could go head-to-head with Cirrus. And an Icon A5 seaplane pilot inadvertently shoots himself down. All this and more, and the news starts now. From generalaviationnews.com, the FAA will amend SFAR 118, extending the validity of some medical training and testing requirements through September 30th, 2020. However, the new extensions do not give those pilots whose medicals originally expired in March any extra time beyond June 30th. Pilots whose medicals would have expired at the end of April, May, June, July, August, and September can add 3 months to their medical certificate's validity in all medical classes except Basic Med, according to officials with AOPA. September is the new cutoff of eligibility for time extensions in the updated SFAR for flight reviews, instrument currency, remote pilot aeronautical knowledge recency, and pilot knowledge exams. The amendment recognizes that even as stay-at-home advisories are lifted, airmen continue to experience difficulty complying with certain training, recency, checking, testing, and duration requirements, the FAA noted. June 30th remains a hard deadline for some pilots who benefited from the original SFAR, such as flight instructors. Those whose certificates were to expire from March to May 2020 still have until June 30th to renew without having to take a practical test. June 30 remains the last date before the expiration of those instructor certificates, according to AOPA. And also from generalaviationnews.com, Sporties launches a virtual air show. While EAA AirVenture Oshkosh has been canceled due to the pandemic, the aviation celebration has found a new home online. Sporties has kicked off its first ever virtual air show, a 5-week-long series of events and experiences to be hosted on Sporties.com and various social media platforms. In addition to new product introductions and show specials, Sporties will also offer weekly webinars, live stream events, contests, and flying videos. The goal is to keep pilots connected and excited about aviation, no matter what their flying plans are this summer, according to company officials. Webinar topics include what's new in aviation headsets, practical tips for flying with an iPad, how to use flight simulators to stay current, proficiency strategies from Sporties' team of flight instructors, and an interactive IFR quiz hour. Sporties will also host webinars from other companies, including ForeFlight and Redbird. Limited-time virtual airshow specials will be available on a variety of products, from training courses and headsets to flight bags and avionics. Other events include a virtual exhibit hangar video series with videos from major aviation brands, live stream sessions with Sporties product experts, and weekly contests. There's fun planned as well, including a live stream concert from Sporties video host and longtime musician Rob Ryder, and a virtual airshow routine from legendary performer Patty Wagstaff. Sporties' 2020 virtual airshow runs from June 29th to August 2nd. For a complete schedule of events, go to sporties.com/airshow. And also from generalaviationnews.com, the impact of COVID-19 on flight schools. A survey conducted in late May by FASANA, the Flight School Association of North America, found that approximately 50% of flight schools did not close during the pandemic. The first question of the survey, did your flight school close due to COVID-19, received responses that included yes, no, and closed dual training but allows solo flying rental. Nearly half said they never closed, while 35% did, and 12.7% indicated they limited operations to solo rental flying. From the 35% who indicated that they had closed, only 40% of those respondents indicated they were open again at the time of the survey. All the respondents were also asked, to what level of operation are you at compared to prior to closure from COVID-19? Responses said about 30% said they were at less than previous operations, with about 56% indicating they were somewhere between half and three-quarters of their former operational level, and about 27% indicating they were between three-quarters and 100% of previous levels. Another question asked, did you lose any customers? And nearly 65% of the responses indicated they thought they had lost some of their customers permanently. When asked if the operation was going to require students and instructors to wear face masks while in flight, 33% said yes, 12% said no, and 36% indicated they were leaving that choice up to their customers. From AINonline.com, pre-owned business aircraft values fall 15% in the COVID era. Average and median values of pre-owned business aircraft have fallen 10 to 15% so far during the pandemic, with some individual makes and models experiencing decreases exceeding 20%, according to a report released by Amstat. Fortunately, the business aviation market research information and services firm said some market segments are now seeing a slowing of value decline. Pre-owned inventories have increased since mid-March, but this is a continuation of an existing trend. The company noted that inventory levels still remain below 2016 levels and significantly below 2009 levels. Amstat General Manager Andrew Young said, while up, inventories are not indicating a panic to sell, and levels remain below recent highs seen in 2017. He added that if inventory levels remain relatively low and interest in business aviation materializes as an alternative to commercial travel in parallel with an economic recovery, quote, then we might expect to see a significant uptick in transaction activity, leading to a recovery in aircraft values in the coming months. And from FlyingMag.com, the NBAA says that business aviation is slowly coming back to life. 3 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, the NBAA reports operators are slowly coming back online as the market and economy attempts to rebound. According to Phil Durner, NBAA Western Regional Representative, we're seeing charter activity increase a bit faster than we expected, which is great news. As the industry starts to slowly emerge, even though we still have COVID-19 lingering around us, it's very important for us to determine best practices. We're all kind of learning as we go during this crisis. And in a related story from FlyingMag.com, the National Air Transportation Association, or NATA, announced its Safety First Clean program, giving guidelines for appropriate sanitation and hygiene measures for aviation businesses. They say that their membership is committed to reducing the spread of contagious diseases, but also understands that no cleaning and disinfecting standard is fail-safe. They say that their standard, which they are calling the Safety First Clean program, represents industry best practices and government agency guidance. The Safety First Clean standard also provides a self-certification process that allows FBOs to highlight their conformance to the standard by displaying the Safety First Clean logo. And from AOPA.org, Diamond announces the all-new DA50RG. Power, legroom, and premium avionics are among the selling points of the latest offering announced by Diamond. It's a retractable gear single that climbs straight to the top of the company's piston single lineup with Continental's 300 horsepower jet fuel-burning CD300 engine up front. The carbon fiber airframe will be packed with features borrowed from Diamond's DA62, which is a large twin. They note that the aircraft will have adjustable seats, 2 up in front, 3 on a second-row bench, gull-wing doors, and lots of room to stretch out. EASA certification is expected in late summer, with FAA certification expected to follow by the end of 2021, the company noted. The DA50RG will also offer options including a removable right-side control stick, an oxygen system, electronic air conditioning, TKS de-icing, and the Garmin G1000 NXI flight deck, including the GFC 700 autopilot. Diamond CEO said that the new model aims to please the private operators seeking a step up in luxury and capability in a single, as well as charter operators eyeing lower-cost alternatives to larger singles and twins. The CD300 jet fuel-burning power plant is expected to use significantly less fuel than other engines with similar power. plus the extra benefits of operating a jet fuel-powered aircraft, much lower emissions compared to leaded fuels, and saving many gallons of fuel and money due to excellent fuel economy, said the CEO. The company did not release pricing details. It did list technical specifications, including a 181-knot top speed, 20,000-foot maximum operating altitude, and 1,232 pounds of useful load. Maximum range was listed at 750 nautical miles, including a 30-minute reserve, with a 9-gallon-per-hour fuel burn for maximum range. The DA50RG will hold 50 gallons of jet fuel. And I've got quite a fefew hours in Diamond's DA40NG, which is the diesel engine version of that aircraft, which runs on jet fuel. And it really is very low fuel burn. That engine is awfully smooth. So I would imagine this will be a very nice aircraft. From FlightGlobal.com, By Aerospace is planning to expand its family of E-Flyer all-electric aircraft with a 6 to 9 passenger model that could take on traditional executive turboprops at light business jets. While details of the new program are being kept under wraps, Chief Executive George Bai said the aircraft is currently in the concept design phase. We are very excited about this project and will announce it publicly before too long. He says the momentum is growing for low-cost and sustainable products, and electric aircraft perfectly fill that niche. Entry into service of the new model is several years out, Bai says, by which time battery technology will have improved dramatically, giving the aircraft the necessary range and performance to compete in this sector. And from AOPA.org, Cub crafters will put into production the nose wheel NX Cub that was unveiled at EAA AirVenture in 2019 and went on to draw praise for its backcountry manners from the pilots who flew the proof of concept. The decision came following a year of marketing surveys showing very strong interest in the tricycle gear, short takeoff and landing aircraft that significantly elevates performance from William Piper's design for the original Super Cub tail dragger and its variants. The aircraft will be available both as a factory-built airplane and as an experimental builder assist project. A Lycoming O360 engine and a Hartzell constant-speed propeller typically power the X Cub, which takes off in less than 200 feet and has a useful load of over 1,000 pounds and holds 49 gallons of fuel. The NX Cub met or bettered the performance specifications during flight test. AOPA previously reported a retail price for the NX Cub of about $338,000. AOPA editor-at-large David Hirschman said it's fast for its category with a cruise speed of 150 miles per hour. You can see over the nose and ground handling is stone simple, he observed. You can even lock up the brakes without penalty, an action that can send shivers through tailwheel pilots. The overbuilt nose wheel tames rough landing strips, and Hirschman was impressed with the aircraft's performance. About 15% of certificated pilots have a tailwheel endorsement or an interest in obtaining one, which makes the nose-wheel aircraft attractive for the other 85% of the market. From planeandpilotmag.com, an update on the Pakistani International Airlines flight that we talked about a few weeks ago. The preliminary report is out for PK Flight 8303, and it looks really bad for the pilots. On May 22nd, the Airbus A320 crashed into a crowded Karachi neighborhood on its second attempt at a full-stop landing, killing 98 passengers and crew. The Airbus's landing gear position has been a source of some controversy, though eventually there was substantial photographic and physical evidence, including huge scrape marks on the runway, that the plane had survived a gear-up landing and thrust reverser application, only to somehow get airborne and go around. The plane's engines failed on that second attempt to land on approach and crashed short of the runway into a neighborhood with very closely spaced houses. The gear was extended, probably to help them lose the excess altitude they had, and then the gear and the speed brakes were retracted at 1,700 feet above the ground by the apparently distracted crew, which led to the gear-up landing and disaster. And in a related story, this comes from GulfNews.com, about 40% of the pilots in Pakistan have fake flying licenses, said the aviation minister. He revealed the startling news about the fake pilots while presenting a provisional inquiry report in the National Assembly of Pakistan about the recent plane crash in Karachi. Quote, Pakistan has 860 active pilots, which includes PIA, Serene Air, and Air Blue pilots as well. The inquiry, which was initiated in February 2019, shows that 262 pilots did not take the exam themselves and asked someone else to sit for the exam on their behalf, the minister said. He said they have found out during the investigation that pilots with fake licenses did not even have proper flying experience. The 40% fake license holders also include hundreds of pilots who are not active flyers. He further revealed that pilots were also appointed on a political basis, unfortunately. Merit was ignored while appointing pilots, he added. He said that degrees of at least 4 PIA pilots have been found to be fake. He said that an inquiry has been initiated in this regard, and show cause notices have been issued to 54 pilots. Some of the pilots have also challenged these notices in court. So far, at least 9 pilots have confessed to holding fake degrees, he claimed. And in a related story, this comes from despardes.com, that's DESPARDES.com. India may have as many as 4,000 fake pilots. The director of their DGCA says 4,000 pilot licenses are now under fresh scrutiny after the airline watchdog started scanning several pilots and grounds on faking their exams to get a pilot's license and violating landing norms. It all began, says a report in local media, after a suspended pilot of Indigo Airline was arrested on charges of faking her exams to get a pilot license. Another arrest on the same grounds has also been made. This time it was Captain J.K. Verma, a pilot of the national air carrier Air India, who was arrested. The report quoted the Civil Aviation Secretary as saying, in the wake of the fake pilot scare, licenses of 3,000 to 4,000 pilots are being scrutinized. And finally, from avweb.com, our story about an Icon A5 pilot who inadvertently shot himself down. There's a multitude of good reasons pilots should do a thorough walk-around before every flight, and the occupants of an Icon A5 found yet another one earlier this month. The pilot and his passengers had just finished washing the sporty little amphib on the afternoon of June 3rd and were taking it out for a hop from the seaplane base at Sky Harbor in Duluth, Minnesota. After turning into the wind, the pilot hit the gas, and about 5 seconds later there was a really loud bang from behind their heads, according to the NTSB factual report. The pilot shut down the engine, climbed out, looked back, and saw that all 3 propeller blades were missing, the report said. At this point, the aircraft started to sink. He and his passengers donned life jackets and evacuated the airplane. The prop blades pierced the fuselage and it went under. The pilot reportedly had one of those unwelcome flashes of recall and told investigators a few days later that while he and his friend were washing the plane, they'd put a portable speaker on the wing to entertain them in their labors. He theorized, quote, that the speaker must have rolled over the engine compartment and into the propellers. He also said he didn't remember putting the speaker away and hasn't seen it since. And that's the news for this week. Coming up, my weekly updates, and then on to our main topic, which is the FAA's Hazardous Attitudes, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. First up, we have this fun flying destination.
Hi, Max. It's Paul from Dallas with a fun flying destination for your listeners. Mount Pleasant Regional Airport, Kilo Oscar Sierra Alpha, is located about 50 nautical miles southwest of Texarkana. The FBO there is remarkably friendly and the facilities are modern and clean. Fuel prices are attractive, and in fact, I stumbled onto this gem of an airport last July when looking for a suitable fuel stop. With episode 146 about WAAS approaches in mind, if you want to fly an RNAV GPS approach that has LNAV VNAV minimums, but no LPV minimums, you can do that here. For non-WAAS aircraft, there are LNAV minimums and a VOR alpha approach that will lead you to a 6,000 by 100-foot runway. However, the main reason for stopping here is the Mid-America Flight Museum. It is a private museum owned by aviator Scott Glover. Scott has collected and restored historically important aircraft to flying condition, and I understand Scott flies all of them and regularly gives free rides to veterans and their families. When the museum is open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., you can see a beautiful collection of around 45 planes that includes a C-47 from D-Day, a Corsair, a P-51 Mustang, and many more remarkable airplanes that I'll take time to list. And if you show up during the week on a fueling stop as we did, if the hangars are open and the restoration work is going on, the FBO folks might just be able to give you an unofficial tour. If your flying travels bring you the vicinity of Northeast Texas, I hope you'll consider Mount Pleasant Regional Airport as a fun flying destination.
Paul, thanks so much for sharing that with us. And if you have a fun flying destination, well, why don't you share it with the other listeners here? Very simple to do. Just take your smartphone, look for the Voice Memos app, record about 90 seconds, and then email it to me at aviationnewstalk@gmail.com, or just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Listener Question at the top of the page. That will lead you to our SpeakPipe recorder, where you can record directly up to 90 seconds, and it will get emailed to me. Now, I don't talk about this a lot, but I am a co-host of the Airplane Geeks podcast. I've been doing that for about 6 years now. They're up to episode 610, and back in episode 606, I told a rather funny story about myself. I thought you might enjoy it. Here it is.
All right, what's up with the geeks? Max West.
Well, let's see. It's been a fun day for me. I actually returned to the old flight school today, and I looked it up. 83 days since I was last doing anything there, so that was pretty wild. And prior to going there, I since I knew I was going to be teaching the simulator, I knew that we were going to be required to wear masks. I was thinking, that massive Santa Claus beard that I've been growing for the past 81 days, because I did shave the first 1 or 2 days I was home, was probably going to interfere with the mask somewhat. And I thought, it's probably a good virus catcher. It's like, I mean, the masks aren't going to fit as well and so on. So in anticipation of this, I didn't have any kind of hair clippers. And so I ordered something from Amazon that came on, Sunday. So very, very recently. Here it is. I read the box here. It says,
Radio, Max. Radio. We can't see the box.
That's why I'm going to read it. Yeah, exactly. It says professional hair clipper, model LA-M938. Bought this on Amazon, and it's got all the little blades. And I read some of the hundreds of reviews that basically said, "Oh yeah, this is great. Use this for my hair. My wife did, blah 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 blah." So I thought, okay, it's fine. So I took the thing out and shaved the beard off. Worked really great. And I hadn't seen the manual when I was pulling it out. And then after I finished up, was all done, I noticed the manual was in there, a place where I hadn't looked before. So I started reading through it to see, what did I miss? And I read through it, and let me just quote what the manual here says. Item number 1, determine the hair length of your pet that needs to be shaved.
One I didn't expect.
Honest to goodness, I laughed for a solid minute. I was hysterical. I just thought, with all of the absurdity and all of the inconveniences and all the unexpected things that we've had with the pandemic, I just thought it was hysterical, because I'm guessing this is not really intended for pets. So this is just a manual, screw up, because they are selling it for people.
Yeah.
But that's what they're telling you now.
Yeah, well, certainly all the reviewers were talking about them, not their pets. But I was just hysterical afterwards. I thought, this is just perfect. But anyway, I've got just the mustache here. I'm kind of sporting the Captain Jeff here look for now. So what do you think?
Yes, it is kind of a Captain Jeff look. It's not it's not long enough to require mustache wax like Launchpad.
Well, anyway, it's been a fun day. It was fun to go do the little simulator training today, and it was just hilarious to remove this beard. And that was from the Airplane Geeks podcast. If you want to check it out, you can find it at airplanegeeks.com or wherever you find podcasts. We have several co-hosts, and we generally talk about commercial aviation, airlines, and stuff like that, along with military aviation. And just as I was finishing up this show, I discovered that an article that was written about me for AOPA's Flight Training Magazine just appeared in their July issue. That's one of 2 magazines that they produce. It was written by Ian Twombly, and it's called Career Spotlight, A Noble Calling, Teach for a Living. And I really like the subheading that he wrote. It says, imagine a career where you could set your own hours, work completely for yourself, create lifelong friendships, and get paid to fly. It seems impossible, but for professional flight instructors, it's the norm. So that's kind of fun. Let's see, at the very bottom of it, they quoted me. They said, to be a great instructor, Truscott says you must be knowledgeable but willing to admit when you don't know the answer. You also need to put your client's needs ahead of your own, and most importantly, be patient. You're going to say more right rudder 100 times to the same person, he said. I joke that I can say it in 12 languages. Well, it's a great little article. They have a photo there of me that was taken 2 summers ago when I was presenting at the AOPA Regional Fly-In in Carbondale for AOPA. So I want to thank AOPA and Ian Twombly, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes if you'd like to see that article. And this is Future Max jumping in. I did just notice a small error in the article. It said that I had become a CSIP 3 years ago. Actually, I got my CSIP from Cirrus back in 2006. It was 3 years ago that I decided to stop teaching in other aircraft and only teach in Cirrus aircraft. And about a month ago, I was interviewed for the Aviation Marketing Hangar Flying podcast, which is a podcast I've listened to for a few years. It's a weekly show by John and Paula Williams, who run an agency that helps aviation businesses grow their business through marketing and advertising. Now, I talked about how flight schools and flight instructors can respond now to help grow their business during the COVID pandemic. And many of the marketing ideas we talked about really would apply to any type of aviation business, not just flight schools. So if you're in the aviation industry and you'd like to be making more sales, you may want to check out their business, which is called Aviation Business Consultants. They have a lot of articles on their website from which you might get some new ideas. And I've included links in our show notes at aviationnewstalk.com/154 to both their business website as well as to their aviation marketing hangar flying podcast. And here's something I hadn't heard of, which is a virus-fighting pen. It has Prevagard, which is an EPA-registered antimicrobial additive molded directly into the pen's plastic components. And you can read about it at viruspen.com. And I only know about it because Kenny Wilson, who is one of our newest mega supporters who donate $50 a month or more to the show, asked me to mention his website. We also have another new mega supporter who is so new that I don't know anything about him yet, but I will tell you more about John Tosto during our next news show. And I want to thank Kenny and John for signing up to support the show at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. Now, we have some other new patrons who joined us this week. They include Chris Percini, Phil Sharp, who's donating $21 a month, Gladys, Dan Coyne, David Waplis, and Lee Way. And we also have some donors who come to us through PayPal. And we have a new monthly donation at $35 a month from someone who wants to remain anonymous. So thank you very much, Anonymous. Greatly appreciate your support. And people can also make one-time donations through PayPal. And I want to thank Fred Canavan for his $30 donation, Paul Dershka for his $50 donation, Dan Clapp made a one-time donation of $100, and Joe Chernesky, $50. Thank you all for all of your donations to the show. Now, PayPal lets you make either a one-time donation or a monthly donation. So if you'd like to do that, head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. Now, each time we have a new show, I mention all of our mega supporters who donate more than $50 a month. And they, of course, will get one of my books after 2 months. These mega supporters include Brian Deere, who lives here in Northern California and flies a Turbo 206. Tyson Weiss, co-founder and CEO of 4Flight, which I'm sure you all know is a popular electronic flight bag app. Victor Vogel, who flies in Central PA and flies a Cirrus. Tim Delaney, who is a wealth manager in Santa Rosa, California, and he flies an SR-22 out of the Santa Rosa Airport. Stephen Elop, he flies a Turbo 182 and a Citation CJ3+. He's the CEO of API Jet. Mike Williams, president of Keomac and TCB Composites, maker of composite spinners and bulkheads for GA aircraft. Seth Lake, he's a DPE giving check rides, and he specializes in teaching the multi-engine rating in his beach travel airs. So if you're interested in getting your multi-engine rating and can travel to Arkansas, check him out at vsl.aero. Rick Miller, who instructs in the Cincinnati area, both out of the Lunken Flight Training Center and with individuals who own Pipers, Cessnas, Beechcraft, and Scottas. He says he'd love to teach full-time, but he still has that day job. Justin Winter, he brokers real estate on Lake Keowee in South Carolina and flies a SR-22. Carl and Ann Rossi of Maine Coon Cat Aviation, proud owners and operators of 3 Cessna T-240 aircraft. Johnny McDade, singer-songwriter, musician, and record producer, who I met up with in Los Angeles a while ago. Jim Goldfuss, he's teaching as a ground instructor as he works on a CFI at the Republic Airport on Long Island, and he also does online coaching for aspiring pilots. You can find him on his Facebook page at ground.9, that's the number 9. Charlie Mason flies out of Santa Monica, and after being out of flying for a long time, he's getting checked out in a Cirrus SR-20. Vincent Salimi, he's council member for the city of Pinole, California. He's also the owner of Salami Construction Management in San Francisco. Jim Hopp is a CFI. He teaches at Advantage Aviation at the Palo Alto Airport in California. Lars Litjen, he's our youngest supporter. He's still flying a Redbird simulator, but he's looking forward to being big enough to fly his dad's Cessna 205 someday. And Dad sells boats in several western states at boulderboats.com. Joseph Sheehan flew in the Navy for 8 years. He's been flying for the past 3 years in an SR-22, and he's just picked up his new Vision jet. Josiah Freeman, he's working on his instrument rating. And Dylan Caldwell, he's a new medical examiner in Florida at the Naples Municipal Airport. So if you need a basic med, second or third class flight physical, contact him at aviatorsclinic.com. Ted Panzishin, student pilot who lives 15 minutes south of Philadelphia in Delaware, where he can watch the airliners join the ILS-9 right approach. William Birch, who donates to the show in the memory of his son, Lieutenant J.G. Wallace Birch, who was a Navy pilot. Bruce Dickerson, who's a financial planner living in Georgia and flies a K-35 Bonanza. Don Hakela with Professional Instrument Courses. He says they conduct 10-day instrument courses, IFR finish-up, and IFR refresher courses. You can find out more about them at iflyifr.com. Stephen Bush, he's the owner of Lone Star Helicopters in Lago Vista, Texas. So if you have any interest in anything helicopter-related, check them out at lonestarheli.com. Don Dillman, professional pilot who runs an airline flight department. He's also a CFI and flies a Bonanza. Rick Mattis, owner of PointWise, which makes CFD, that's computational fluid dynamics simulation software, used by aerospace companies. You can find them at pointwise.com. And Kenny Wilson and John Tosco, who we mentioned at the beginning of the show. Thanks so much to everyone who contributes to the show in any way. Now stick around because we're going to be talking about that interesting Las Vegas Class B violation and the FAA's hazardous attitudes, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's talk about hazardous attitudes. This is an important concept that just really doesn't get the attention it deserves in flight training. And I've wanted to talk about it here for a long time, as I feel the way in which it's presented in the FAA's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is incomplete and misses a few key concepts that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, by the way, the Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, that's available as a free PDF on the FAA.gov website, and I will include a link to it in our show notes. ADM, aeronautical decision-making, is another concept that doesn't get enough attention, so I'd encourage you to read the entire Chapter 2 in that book. Now, most pilot accidents are the result of poor pilot judgment, and most of that poor judgment can be traced back to poor decision-making. So ADM is arguably one of the most important subjects for pilots to study. Now, the FAA's 5 hazardous attitudes, it's a dry subject in the abstract, but fortunately, we have a concrete example thanks to a recent ATC exchange that circulated on social media for the past week. In it, a pilot is called out for being in Class Bravo without a clearance, which is a per se violation of the FARs. But then, to make it worse, the pilot ignores an order to exit the Bravo and begins arguing with the controller. So what started out as perhaps an inadvertent violation turned into a willful violation when the pilot didn't comply with ATC instructions. We're going to talk about the 5 hazardous attitudes in detail in a few minutes, but just to list them here, they are anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho, and resignation. Just a hint, I don't think this pilot suffers from resignation. Now we're going to take a listen to this series of exchanges and see which of the 5 hazardous attitudes you feel are exhibited by the pilot. First, take a listen to how long it takes the pilot to answer when he's first called. That kind of delay is characteristic of a 6th hazardous attitude that's been proposed by a researcher who calls it saving face, and we'll talk more about that later. And before I play the clip, think first about how you would respond if you were told you were in the Bravo without a clearance. Now, by the way, this is a busy approach frequency. At the beginning of the conversation, the pilot appears to be a little less than 20 miles out from the McCarran Airport, and he's just starting to cross the finals for 26 left and 26 right, which are the main air carrier runways there. And he has 2 Southwest jets that are 1,000 to 2,000 feet above him and converging from the southeast to join the final near where he's located. The pilot is flying November 731 November Romeo, a Cessna 210, which left Centennial Airport near Denver, Colorado a few hours earlier, and is headed for the Henderson Airport just south of Las Vegas and under the Las Vegas Class B. The plane had been acquired a little over a year before and appears to be based at Torrance Airport in Torrance, California. And if you think, well, maybe this pilot just wasn't familiar with Class B airspace, let me point out that home base of Torrance is about 8 miles southeast of LAX, and it's located under the Los Angeles Class Bravo. So the pilot is surely knowledgeable about Class Bs as he's based under one, but apparently he doesn't feel those rules apply to him. Here's the first exchange.
And 1 November Romeo, I need you outside of the Bravo.
Negative.
Negative what?
I'm inside.
You were not given a clearance through the Bravo. 1 November Romeo, exit the Bravo immediately.
I've been talking to you the whole time. That's the whole point of talking to you.
You have to have a Bravo clearance. You have to request a Bravo clearance.
The Bravo clearance about 50 miles ago.
Nobody clears you through the Bravo but me.
Then clear me through.
No.
Yes.
So let's break that down. The controller tells the pilot she needs him outside the Bravo. If he had simply descended and complied, that would probably have been the end of it. But no, this pilot decides to argue because he couldn't possibly be wrong. It's not his fault he doesn't have a clearance because he asked for it 50 miles ago. Well, did he ask for it? It's not at all clear that he did. Here is the only prior transmission on this frequency, which occurred about 7 minutes earlier.
Vegas approach, Mr. 731 November Romeo. Switching to second cruise 9000.
1 November Romeo, Las Vegas approach, Las Vegas altimeter 2988. Information, Mike Curran at Henderson, no landing 35.
I have Mike.
Nope, no mention of a Class B clearance there. Now, first, you will rarely get a Class B clearance 50 miles out, as this pilot said he'd ask for it, because you're not yet talking to the controller responsible for the Class B who could issue that clearance. And if you don't get a clearance, regardless of why you didn't get it, you are never allowed to go into the Class B. Most pilots know this and will do whatever it takes to avoid a Class Bravo. But this pilot is apparently special because it's not his fault he's in the Class B without a clearance. By the way, these are classic characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. And no, I'm not saying this pilot has NPD. I'm just saying that in my opinion, he seems to exhibit some of the characteristics of someone who has NPD. And I could do an entire show on NPD because I once had a family member who suffered from it and made life for everyone around her miserable. Now, NPD involves a pattern of self-centered, arrogant thinking and behavior, a lack of empathy and consideration for other people, and an excessive need for admiration. And people with NPD tend to blame others for their failures, and they are extremely sensitive to the slightest criticism or disagreements, which they view as personal attacks which lead them to strike back. I'll put some links into the show notes about NPD because if you have people like this in your life, it helps a lot to understand the disorder so you have some effective tools for dealing with people that suffer from it.
987 will expect a Gold Strike 55.
Southwest 285, contact tower 1990. Have a great day.
Over tower, good luck. Southwest 285. Good.
Southwest 779, traffic 12 o'clock, 4 miles. Is a Cessna Centurion. You're sending out of 4,700 inside the Bravo without a clearance.
Okay, we're looking Southwest 779. I've asked for a clearance multiple times.
And November 1 November Romeo, I told you to remain outside the Bravo. And 1 November Romeo, possible pilot deviation, advise you contact Las Vegas approach at, I'll give you the number when you're ready to copy.
Not ready to copy, I'm flying.
Note that the first time he interacted with a controller, he seemed to get a pass from her. She didn't tell him then to advise when ready to copy a phone number. Had he just kept quiet at this point, he probably would have gotten through all of this without being tagged with a violation. But no, he persisted and in the process kept digging the hole he was in even deeper. It doesn't appear that he ever took that phone number from the Las Vegas approach controller, But when he landed at Henderson, he may have told a story about how poorly he'd been treated by ATC, because after he's told to copy the phone number again, the one he didn't take from the lady controller, the controller at Henderson apologizes to him.
72524.
November 1, November Romeo Rudder, and contact ground 127.8. And again, I don't know what happened, but from what you say, sorry for the service.
Thank you. Calling ground.
And hey, any of us can have a bad day, and you might be thinking, gosh, this pilot was mistreated. I'm sure he's a great pilot. Well, I kind of wondered how the day started, so I went into liveatc.com to find out how things went earlier in the day as he was departing from Centennial Airport. Now, in that recording, you can't hear his side of the conversation, but here's what a controller said to him as he was taxiing out to the runway.
Tyrion 1 November Romeo, hold short, Romeo 17 left. Tyrion 1 November Romeo, in the future, call ground for a taxi to the runway.
Okay, so hopefully the FAA will follow up with this pilot as he seems to have racked up multiple violations on just one flight. So getting back to the 5 hazardous attitudes, which one do you think was the best fit for this pilot? I think anti-authority is the best fit, but you could argue that a couple of others were on display, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. First, why do we even care whether pilots exhibit any of these attitudes? Aren't pilots allowed to be in a bad mood or to say nasty things over the radio? Sure, but why we care is because there is a link between these attitudes and accidents. This comes from a PhD dissertation submitted in March 2016 to Embry-Riddle by Dr. Jonathan Velazquez. A search online shows that he is now an aviation professor at Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. The dissertation is titled Behavioral Traps in Flight Crew-Related Part 121 Airline Accidents, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes. He starts the dissertation by reviewing a number of previous studies, and he cites a 2006 study by Wetmore and Liu, who studied fatal GA accidents and found that an increase in hazardous attitudes led to greater risk-taking, poor decision-making, and a reduction in use of resources, 3 very important skills in CRM, or cockpit resource management. And in that same study, they found that hazardous attitudes were a contributing factor in 86% of GA accidents that involved a fatality. So hazardous attitudes are linked to accidents, which is why we care about them. About 20 years ago, Robert Rossier wrote about hazardous attitudes in an article published in AOPA Pilot magazine. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. In it, he said, under normal circumstances, our decision-making processes operate effectively. But when stressors are present, the decision-making process can become strained or fail altogether as the pilot fails to properly evaluate any of the 5 flight elements. Stressors can be broadly categorized as physical, physiological, and psychological. Physical stressors relate to our environment and include such factors as cockpit temperature, noise, vibration and turbulence, hypoxia, and carbon monoxide. Any of these stressors can alter our perceptions to the point that we're no longer able to make realistic evaluations. Physiological stressors are those that affect the functioning of our bodies and minds. They include such common factors as fatigue and proper nutrition. A good checklist for these items is the I'm Safe checklist. The third category is psychological stressors, and these include myriad factors such as peer pressure, self-image, get-home-itis, and the hurry-up syndrome. Such stressors can severely alter our perception of the 5 elements of flight decision-making. When stressors mount, the attitudes that we normally keep in check may begin to adversely influence our decision-making ability. Our judgment becomes compromised, and we begin to slide down a slippery slope toward disaster. What's important is that we recognize the traits within us, understand how these traits can develop into hazardous attitudes, and develop mechanisms to readjust our thought processes as we enter the zone of hazardous attitudes and dangerous decision-making. And then he starts describing the 5 hazardous attitudes. And you might wonder who came up with these attitudes. Well, Dr. Velazquez tells us about that in his dissertation. He says, quote, the study of hazardous attitudes in aviation began in the early 1980s at Embry-Riddle as a direct outcome of the late 1970s work on pilot decision-making from Jensen and Bennell. In a 1982 paper, Berlin et al. Developed a training curriculum that addressed judgment and decision-making. Berlin found that physiological, psychological, and external pressures influence every decision a pilot makes. The study also found that a need for a pilot to maintain a self-image can impair pilot judgment. One of the results of Berlin et al. Was the identification of the hazardous attitudes. And then he gives a table here that describes the 5 hazardous attitudes and provides the recommended antidote used to counteract each one. The application of the antidote is possible only after a pilot has been able to first recognize the presence of the hazardous attitude. Now let's get to those 5 hazardous attitudes. Here's what the FAA says in the FAA Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and we have a link to that in our show notes, which you can find on the app that you're listening to us with now or at aviationnewstalk.com/154. The handbook says, being fit to fly depends on more than just a pilot's physical condition and recent experience. For example, attitude affects the quality of decisions. Attitude is a motivational predisposition to respond to people, situations, or events in a given manner. Studies have identified 5 hazardous attitudes that can interfere with the ability to make sound decisions and exercise authority properly. And then he lists them: anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho, and resignation. Hazardous attitudes contribute to poor pilot judgment, but can be effectively counteracted by redirecting the hazardous attitude so that correct action can be taken. Recognition of hazardous thoughts is the first step toward neutralizing them. After recognizing a thought as hazardous, the pilot should label it as hazardous, then state the corresponding antidote. So the first one is anti-authority, which can be summarized as "don't tell me." This attitude is found in people who do not like anyone telling them what to do. In a sense, they are saying, no one can tell me what to do. They may be resentful of having someone tell them what to do, or may regard rules, regulations, and procedures as silly or unnecessary. However, it is always your prerogative to question authority if you feel it is an error. And this is certainly the attitude that I felt came out most strongly in the Las Vegas incident that we've been discussing. The next attitude is impulsivity, summarized as do it quickly. This is the attitude of people who frequently feel the need to do something, anything, immediately. They do not stop to think about what they are about to do. They do not select the best alternative, and they do the first thing that comes to mind. This reminds me of an accident that occurred in one of our club aircraft. A couple from Australia rented one of our planes and took it to Alaska. The couple landed because of poor weather, but then saw a hole in the cloud and took off into it and were killed. The pilot was not IFR rated. The next one is invulnerability, summarized as "it won't happen to me." Many people falsely believe that accidents happen to others, but never to them. They know accidents can happen, and they know that anyone can be affected. However, they never really feel or believe that they will be personally involved. Pilots who think this way are more likely to take chances and increase risk. And I certainly experienced this when I was younger. I used to always think that bad things in airplanes only happen to other people, but then I had a number of alternator failures, a vacuum pump failure, 2 rough engines in flight, all of which convinced me that no, I wasn't special, and that all the things I read about happening to other people could also happen to me. The next one is macho, summarized by "I can do it." Pilots who are always trying to prove that they are better than anyone else think, "I can do it, I'll show them." Pilots with this type of attitude will try to prove themselves by taking risks in order to impress others. While this pattern is thought to be a male characteristic, women are equally susceptible. And I think you can argue that our pilot in the Las Vegas incident that we've been discussing exhibited some macho attitudes. The macho attitude is trying to prove that you are better than anyone else. And our final attitude is resignation. Pilots who think, what's the use? They don't see themselves as being able to make a great deal of difference in what happens to them. When things go well, the pilot is apt to think, well, it was good luck. When things go badly, the pilot may feel that someone is out to get them or attribute it to bad luck. The pilot will leave the action to others for better or worse. Sometimes such pilots will even go along with unreasonable requests just to be a nice guy. Now, when I first read about the 5 hazardous attitudes, they didn't immediately resonate with me. The way they were written, or maybe the way I first interpreted them, seemed to suggest that a pilot could only fall into one of these categories. And going back to Dr. Velazquez's dissertation, he mentions a study that seemed to suggest that pilots fall into just one category. He cites a 1984 paper by Lester and Bombacci that found that the majority of general aviation pilots who exhibit hazardous attitudes fall into the attitude of invulnerability, 43%, followed by impulsivity, 20%, and macho, 14%. No participants fell into the remaining 2 categories. So the problem I had when I first read these attitudes was that I took them to mean that a macho pilot acted macho all over the time. And it was easy for me to dismiss them because in thinking about my flying behavior, I could honestly say that I wasn't macho all the time. In fact, it was true that I almost never held that attitude. But here's how my thinking on this has evolved. As the years went by, I could remember a few different situations where I could honestly say, yes, in that one I was acting a little anti-authority. Oh, and in that one, yeah, I acted a little impulsively. And in another one, I acted a little bit invulnerable. And in another one, yes, definitely acted macho. In a couple of those cases, I came a little closer to disaster than I would have liked. So I now clearly see the connection between these attitudes and potential accidents. I think a more useful way to look at the 5 hazardous attitudes is to recognize that any of us could succumb to any or even all of the 5 hazardous attitudes, depending upon the particular situation that we're in. And so it's important to study them so that we can hopefully recognize if one or more of them gets in the way of our decision-making. Now, Dr. Velazquez's dissertation mentions a 6th hazardous attitude. In a 1999 paper, Murray suggested a 6th hazardous attitude called fear of loss of face. Loss of face is the interpretation a person has about how others view him or her. When a person is embarrassed or looks foolish, they have experienced a loss of face. Murray argues that at the individual level, fear of loss of face is exemplified when a pilot receives a perplexing ATC instruction and prefers to remain silent to avoid being judged as incompetent. At the group level, aviation crews are looked at as good communities, and any person who casts uncertainty or has doubts may be shamed or ridiculed. The author argued that in a multi-crew cockpit, loss of face may be the most critical factor during CRM. And I think in that Las Vegas example, the pilot was probably experiencing a loss of face, which may be why he was defending his actions so strenuously. So the big question is, what do you do if one of these 6 hazardous attitudes creeps into your thinking someday? Well, recognizing those hazardous thoughts is the first step toward neutralizing them. After recognizing a thought as hazardous, the pilot should label it as hazardous, then state the corresponding antidote. Antidotes should be memorized for each of the hazardous attitudes so they automatically come to mind when needed. And here are those antidotes. If you're feeling anti-authority and thinking, don't tell me what to do, remember the FAA antidote, which is follow the rules, they are usually right. Which is really my personal mantra when I fly. I work extremely hard to try to follow every rule all the time. Because if you decide, well, I don't need to follow this one rule, it doesn't apply to me, you may later do that with another rule and then another rule, which becomes a slippery slope without end. Just remember that the rules are designed to protect you and other people, and that's the reason you should follow the rules. For impulsivity, which is do it quickly, the FAA antidote is to remember not so fast to think first. And I must say that I used to always rush around in life figuring I could fit more things into a day. But I always consciously slowed down when I got to the airport because over the years I found that trying to do things fast in aviation was counterproductive. For example, I got tired of banging my head into wing struts because I was moving rapidly during pre-flight. And now I'm more relaxed and take things slower in all aspects of life, so I don't need to slow down when I get to the airport. Invulnerability, which is a feeling of it won't happen to me. The FAA antidote is to think it could happen to me. And for those of you who, like me, used to think, hey, I'm special, no, actually, despite what your mom or dad may have told you, when it comes to aviation, you're really not special. You're just another pilot, and all of the bad things you read about happening to other pilots can also happen to you. And then macho, which is pilots trying to prove something to themselves or others, the antidote is thinking taking chances is foolish. And finally, resignation, which I've only ever seen once in the cockpit when a student gave up while performing a stall and just let go of the controls and put his hands in his lap. The antidote is, I'm not helpless, I can make a difference. And for the 6th attitude about the loss of face, I propose a new antidote, which would be, so what if I'm embarrassed? Being embarrassed can lead to accidents if people don't speak up when there's a problem. So when you fly, please don't be like that guy in Las Vegas Class Bravo. And do monitor yourself so you'll recognize when one of the 6 hazardous attitudes starts to creep into your thinking. And coming up next, listener questions and feedback right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And here are a couple of emails from people who really seem to like our interview with Mike Goulian in episode 153. This comes from Kelly, who writes, I have entertained completing my CFII and buying a Cirrus SR-20 with air conditioning here in my state. I belong to 2 flight clubs, and I see a broad difference in flight instruction. I think my 40 years of flying and coaching sports will translate into the cockpit. I have about 60 hours in my friend's Cirrus and find it a fine aircraft for many missions. Listening to your podcast, love them, and the interview with Mike Goulian have inspired me to commit to a higher level of flight proficiency. We have a lot of flight instructors in the area who are using instruction to build time. Thanks for that, Kelly. Glad to hear that inspired you, and good luck with your plan there. And this comes from Victor, who's another Patreon supporter, who says, all your episodes on Aviation News Talk are fabulous. Love Jason Blair. But the recent hour with Mike Goulian was the best yet. I met him at AOPA in Frederick several years ago, where he was the consummate gentleman. His story about the reprimand he received for flying the 0-degree pitch during low-altitude rolls really tells us about Goulian the man. Few of us would tell such a self-effacing personal story. I have the deepest respect for both of you. I think I'll make a visit to him in Plymouth next month if he's willing, so I can pick his brain about running a flight school. So both of those people thinking about getting into flight instruction inspired by that interview, so I think that's great. Now here's a question from Amanda.
Hello, Max. My name is Amanda Curlis, and I'm a CFII. I'm curious about flight instruction in the Cirrus. I've been told you need a CSIP for most insurance to cover you. Some people say it's not necessary as well, and that you can instruct without it. What's your take on this, and what typically is the requirement for insurance, and what would you recommend to me as an instructor? CSIP or no CSIP?
Thank you, Amanda. And no, legally you don't need a CSIP to teach in a Cirrus, but as we all know, there's a difference between being legal and being safe. And insurance companies know this as well, which is why some of them require their customers to have annual recurrent training, but only from a CSIP instructor. So why is it important that you don't decide, what the heck, I can legally teach in these airplanes? Because these aircraft are different from other planes, and they have some nuances that can get pilots and instructors into trouble if they aren't properly trained. Now, oddly, I think the planes are easy to fly, but only if you have the proper training. And they require significantly more time to master, say, a SR-22 than the checkout you might get in a Cessna 182 or a 206. And I always believe in trying to back up my opinion with data, so let me give you some of the data. In 2018, I attended a presentation put on by COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association, and there they showed a slide with details of the 18 fatal Cirrus accidents in which a flight instructor was on board. And of these, 16 were non-CSIP instructors. And just a month ago, we had a student pilot die here in California while he was on a cross-country solo in a Cirrus SR-20, and it appears that his instructor wasn't a CSIP. So yes, CSIPs can legally teach in a Cirrus, and I always strongly encourage Cirrus owners to not fly with instructors unless they are a CSIP. So yes, if you have an interest in teaching a Cirrus aircraft, I would strongly urge you to become a CSIP. There are some minimum requirements, I think, but I'm not sure. I think they require 500 hours of total time, 250 hours of dual given. The training runs for 5 days in Knoxville, Tennessee, and recently one of our Patreon supporters, Matt Wallace, went through it, and he sent me an email about 2 months ago. He wrote, Max, I'm just finishing day 2 of CSIP. Can I say, wow, what an experience. The whole Vision Center, which is what they call the whole training facility there, and seeing the simulators and the owners taking delivery has been great. I was a little worried coming in because they stress being current and proficient, and even though I am those things, I was a little intimidated. Well, day 1 was all ground and I killed it. I had made very in-depth PowerPoints for the systems and it went great. Day 2 totally rocked on the flying. Just wanted to say hi and thanks for the encouragement, as it has been a great experience. Also wanted to say that they stress that you are being evaluated the whole time and that they are not here to teach you a new airplane from scratch. Part of me was a little worried that I wouldn't so much get to learn as much as I would be evaluated. Let me tell you, even though I have done great thus far, I have learned a ton. Such a great experience for me. Always thanks for being accessible and for your help, Matt. Yeah, that's my experience too. Every time I go to any kind of Cirrus-sponsored training, I learn a ton, even though I've been teaching in Cirrus now for, 14 years and have several thousand of hours of experience in them. Unfortunately, the training is not inexpensive. I think it runs around $7,000. If you're interested in becoming a CSIP, I would suggest you contact the Cirrus sales rep for your state to talk about your interest in Cirrus and how they might help you in getting into the training program, and about ways to prepare for CSIP training, as some people are unable to complete the training once they get there because they didn't adequately prepare before they arrived. So, Amanda, I hope that helps. And just a quick reminder, this is a listener-supported show, and I would love it if you consider joining the roughly 3 to 4% of listeners who donate to support the show. As you probably know, my goal is to help keep pilots informed and to provide them with information that can hopefully save a life, maybe yours. So if you find the show valuable, and hey, you've been listening for an hour, so you must have, please take just a couple of minutes to sign up to donate monthly, or you could make a one-time donation via credit card through either Patreon or PayPal. For example, think about how much you'd pay your flight instructor for an hour, or maybe what you'd spend to rent an airplane for an hour, and then maybe send us an hour's worth of support. And if you donate, I'll read your name on this show, and depending on what level you sign up at, you might get the scripts to my news shows, links to the news stories that we had to cut for time. For example, this week we cut out about 13 stories. Free access to my online courses, and at the $50 a month level, I'll read your name on every news show and send you a signed copy of one of my books after 2 months. If you'd like to receive all those goodies, you'll need to sign up through Patreon to make a monthly donation. To do that, go to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome and enter your credit card information. You can also support the show through PayPal, and their system gives you a choice of either donating monthly or making a one-time donation. Now, if you sign up via PayPal, I don't have a way to get the show notes to you, but you can still get the free online courses and the books I offer at the $35 and $50 a month levels. And to donate via PayPal, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And thanks to everybody who supports the show in whatever way you do. And finally, please, please, please tell all of your friends, and you're going to have a lot of time over the 4th of July to do that. Tell all your friends about the Aviation News Talk podcast. And if they still don't know what a podcast is, send them to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our dedicated app for free. Just search in the store for Aviation News Talk. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.